bunch of, SSRIs and various other drugs that, may have kind of destabilized her. And she's saying that she heard a voice.
And what I'd like to share with you off the bat is when you're assessing for involuntary intoxications, essentially a defense that the drug made you do it, you are always going to be looking for alternative explanations for the behavior.
We're going to have our guest today introduce himself. My name is Casey. This channel is uh, expressly intended to create a future of faith, fatherhood, and freedom in America. Thank you for tuning in. And part of that means that we're going to analyze the foibles of the mental health industry because, as a therapist of 13 years, I'm deeply concerned that we might be doing harm when we've all taken vows not to. And so, in that honor, I have Dr. Richard Blake. He goes by the Breath Geek on Instagram, and he has a lot of insight. We're going to have him share his background, and then we have some questions about the Lindsay Clancy case and how that relates to bigger systemic problems in our industry. So, Richard, can you introduce yourself?
I'm Richard. I have a PhD in psychology. I do have a postgraduate certificate in psychotherapy, but halfway through that training, I learnt a lot of the failings of the system, and I was like, "Ooh, I don't know if I want to do another 5 years of training in a system that I'm not sure works." So I'm going to go down and do a research track, and that's what I do now is research and then share research and write books and things like that. I have a book, should be out in about a month. It's called Cut Off, and it's about understanding the drivers behind the family estrangement epidemic.
That's such a good topic, and that may have been the reason why I came across your channel initially on Instagram, because I speak often about the cutoff culture that we're now in. Do you want to say a piece about that and what you've seen?
So I could say a lot about it. I have written a whole book on it and created a course. So I think that you always have to start by saying sometimes cut-offs are necessary in cases of severe abuse and severe sexual harm and severe neglect. And whenever you talk about this stuff, people are like, well, I know this case of this kid who was had the shit kicked out of it for years, and obviously that makes sense to cut that person off. And then you'll hear a lot of social workers piping up and things like that, being like, you don't know what some kids go through. I'm like, well, I'm not talking about these people. Obviously,
Right.
there are terrible, terrible cases, but the research by Finkelhorst shows that physical abuse has gone down 70% since 1993, and it was going down massively before that as well. So 70% is not zero. So obviously there are still cases, but how do we have a number going down in terms of physical abuse and sexual abuse, but at the same time cutoffs and trauma are going up?
Right.
They can't be, because at the same time as when they did that stat from 1993, they expanded the definition of abuse and neglect and things then. So that's another argument people come up with, being like, oh yeah, no, they're not categorizing enough things as
Right.
abuse. Like at that time they increased the categorization, yet it's still gone down 70% and continues to go down, and yet everyone's saying I have trauma and my parents abused me for not turning up to my school play and saying that my hairstyle wasn't very good or something
Correct.
unbelievably minor and trivial.
So, what does that imply or indicate about how did we get to that place where the claims of trauma are going up, but the actual abuse cases are going down? What's the implicit conclusion?
Yeah, there's many things. There's sociological, political, therapeutic, psychological things all going on. I like that study that they've kind of replicated now with mental health. I've just done a reel about, but the blue dot experiment. Do you know the blue dot experiment?
No.
Okay, so they brought researchers in and they showed them a load of dots, purple dots and blue dots, and they said click when you see a blue dot, and then slowly over time they removed the number or reduced the number of blue dots, and so people started clicking on purple dots and saying they were blue.
Yeah.
And basically what it shows is like when the brain has an expectation, it expands its definition to maintain that same definition. And then they did the same thing with scary faces. They showed a load of scary faces and then reduced the number of scary faces, and people were clicking on neutral faces saying they were scary. And then they did the same thing with moral statements. And then they've done another similar study with mental illness, and basically showing like definitions of mental health has kind of got better as conditions have got better, living standards, the number of people living in extreme poverty going down, the number of people with access to healthcare, and the huge amount that's spent on social services in the West. Everything's gotten better, but people are still used to like the feudal times where times were really tough and children wouldn't live into adulthood. Mental illness has expanded, or the definition of mental illness has expanded to include normal things. There's also victim culture, victim and oppressor culture. There's a lot of people now who realise that they're not going to get to the top because they don't have, I don't know, the personality, the intelligence, the strength, the determination, the competence. And there is. I am reminded of the Nietzschean terms of slave morality. I don't know if you've heard of that term, but it's basically morality only exists for the weak to try and get the strong to stop doing various things. Like without morality, the strong would just run amok and take all the resources. And I think this is a way for weaker people or less competent people or people with less access to resources to get access to resources. It's like, well, I can't get a high test grade, I can't earn as much, or I don't have the ability to work as hard as other people, so I'm just going to undercut them by being like, well, you're mean for taking these things, give me resources, I have mental illnesses, even though I may not have a mental illness, or my mental illness may be unbelievably mild. It's a way to get sympathy, resources, justice, and it is being used as a weapon and a shield. And at the same time, I've had mental illness, I struggle with depression, it is real, it is awful, but there are a lot of people who are milking the system.
So that's one we always want to use the exception as the rule, and people trying to maybe refute some of the research that you've come up with. And like you said, we all know somebody who has been actually treated unjustly, whether it's in their parent relationships or in society. But then we use that as a new heuristic to try to advantage people that are less competent. And mental illness, of course, is a good vehicle for that. I think I got into this industry because I too struggled with addiction. I really wanted to engage people to try to help them promote their recovery. And in working with men and women over the last 13 years, I've just seen that the systemic attitude towards mental illness has really shifted. I actually worked in advocacy work to promote that in 2017 and 2018, and now we're reaping some of what we sowed, and it ultimately has just a new sort of hierarchy. So we all complained about the societal hierarchies, and then we built a new one in order to try to prove that the less competent deserved the same amount of resources. Really, it's resource acquisition, it seems. I appreciate your research.
Maybe you're right. Maybe men don't need therapy. And frankly, maybe women and children don't really need it either, the way that it's being practiced today.
Lindsay Clancy, I didn't want to report on this case because it's so dark. And this is the part of my industry that really has an effect on my psyche, on my soul over time. It hurts to hear these stories over and over, and it's really difficult. But because of the failings of the mental health care system, I felt it was necessary to try to give some analysis. So, in your opinion, I think she was given at least 4 or 5 different mental health care providers, all those medications, and opportunities to try to receive the help that, we, people like you and I, have tried to be a part of providing. Did the system, in this case, fail her? Without obfuscating responsibility from her for the horrible things she did, because that deserves to be taken account of?
Obviously, the system is failing a lot of people. I lived in San Francisco and Oakland. Now I live in Austin, and I see every day the people who are being failed by the system. And I think it's, Gad Saad's idea of suicidal empathy. Like,
Right.
I see these people that I live very close to a big homeless encampment, and these people are suffering horrifically from mental illnesses and are baking in the 100-degree heat every day because we're being empathetic. It's like,
Yes.
why aren't those people given, the institutions? Obviously, the institutions, some of them did terrible things, but it's like throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Now these people are, doing horrible things to each other as well. They are, extremely unfortunate, and they deserve to be taken care of by an institution. Taking away some of their freedom to protect them, I think,
Right.
is the empathetic thing to do.
Right.
Giving them freedom to do more drugs, rob from each other, sexually abuse each other, bake in the heat is not empathetic in my mind, and not to mention the harm they do to all the people around them. The neighbourhood. I've had, I get stuff thrown at me, shouted at, been
Yeah.
chased, those types of things. So Lindsay Clancy, obviously, she went through the system. It's a big system. Mental illness is such a it's not really a science in the same way that like cancer is science or virology is a science.
Amen.
So we kind of use the science of like, oh, this is medicine, so we'll give them medicine for their illness. But every mental illness is so unique. So just categorizing into someone as postpartum depression, postpartum psychosis, depression, regular psychosis, like they're all just like shoving someone into a box with a completely individual case. And it's very hard to treat that, and that's why we have the treatment prevalence paradox. So that's what my second book will be about. It's called The Anxiety Industry, that I've sort of half written, and I'll be looking for an agent and a publisher soon. But the treatment prevalence paradox is this idea from Jorm, and then Pim Kuipers as well looked into it, and it's basically why is mental illness the only area of medicine where, as we get more treatment, as we get more awareness, the statistics don't go down, recovery doesn't improve, it goes up. The more mental health we have, or the more mental health treatment we have, the worse it gets.
Right.
And it's very confusing. There's many reasons for it, but it is like, it's a failing system, and it's it feels like you can't say that because, mental health, we have to be sympathetic and empathetic to people with mental health treatments and things like that. And at the same time, as someone who works in the mental health industry, I feel like there's only a few of us being like, hey, we're partly responsible here. We need to do better. There's a lot of things we're doing here that are harming people.
Yes. Which that led into my next question about the medical model, but my project in general, looking into people who've gone before me in research, like Leonard Sachs, who wrote Boys Adrift, or Jonathan Haidt, of course, with the Anxious Generation. I feel that boys are being especially targeted. In California most recently, they've said that up to 25 to 40% of boys attending school there meet criteria for ADHD, in which case we are quite simply, medicalizing or disordering them based on normal boyhood behaviors and a school system which isn't set up to advantage them. So I appreciate that some of us, yes, there's a paradox there. The more mental health care providers that are given into the field, the more mental illness is prevalent, and that seems to always be excused by, well, we just recognize more now. The symptom picture is more available to us, and it's more specific, or there's broader, really, diagnostic criteria. So I appreciate that angle. I'm a heretic. I believe you are too, because you take the position that this isn't being done well. And that gives us probably a little bit of standout potential online, and as you've taken full advantage of. And I hope your books are wildly successful. When did the medical model begin to sort of be applied to mental health, and in a greater way? Is that the problem? Is that the medicalization and the turn from maybe more psychoanalytic to a medical model when did this start to go wrong, and what happened, in your opinion?
Well, I mean, you say start to go wrong. I don't know if it ever went right. Going back to Freud and Brouwer and things like that, their success rates were not impressive.
Right.
When did it become the medical model? That would be with SSRIs when they brought in the antidepressants and said that there was a chemical imbalance causing depression, and that was just marketing that scientists spread for 20, 30 years, and then only recently has it been really debunked. But one of the things that you do need to say is some people do get better with antidepressants. It does help some people. But we don't understand the mechanism for it right now, which is fine. That was the same with aspirin. We didn't know why aspirin worked for a long, long time, but we still knew it worked. But yeah, there's a lot of influences that come along and make things worse. So private equity is one I'm looking into more now. They are getting into therapy, and when you look at how private equity got into medicine in the US, you can see that they made more money, but outcomes did not improve, and that's probably what we're going to see in mental health, and probably worse, because one of the things I think with mental health is social contagion is a big thing, and it's quite easy to convince someone they're mentally ill when they're actually just struggling, and bringing it back to cutoff and family estrangement, I think there's a pattern that I see is someone is struggling. Everyone struggles at some point in life. Life is hard. It's kind of meant to be hard. It's obviously harder for other people, for some people than others. They go, oh well, you need therapy. So you go into therapy, and the therapist goes, how's your relationship with your parents? And you're like, oh, it's quite good. And then they're like, this is suspicious. No one has good parents. And then they start to ask them about their parents. And Lawrence Petitjas did a study. What happens when you start to speak about past memories about your mother is what he looked at. The more times you speak about it, the more negative your interpretation of it gets. So therapy kind of inherently is biased to create a negative interpretation of your childhood. So then that is used as your explanation of why am I struggling now? Why am I not top of my class? Why am I not at the grad schemes of the top law firms or things like that? Why am I an average student? They're like, oh, well, my parents must have done something or failed to do something. I should blame them. Relationships are tricky, especially with family. Or my mum doesn't respect my boundaries. My mum says I should eat more healthy or go to bed earlier. She's critical. She won't respect my boundaries. We're not respecting boundaries as grounds for cut-off. Oh, I've tried everything. I tried for years. That's what everyone always says. Like, I tried for years, and in the end I had to cut off my mother. And it's like, did you try for years, and was what happened to you worthy of cut-off? And that's where this the concept creep comes from. So now people are being told, oh, you have emotional abuse. So when the word abuse gets in there, people are like, oh, that's abuse is like categorized in the same category as sexual abuse and physical harm. Right. You cut people off for abuse. So the crime of criticizing your child is put in the same bracket as sexually abusing your child, and then the punishment is still the same. Even though the crime is far more minor than sexual abuse, people are still getting the punishment, i.e. cut off.
And I believe this has been especially recently applied to the political worldview, and that to me is an extremely disturbing criteria, because we know from ages 14 to 25 or so, you are adaptively intended to begin to break away from your parents. You have a more empathetic view just naturally. I think it was Churchill that said, if you're not a liberal when you're young, you don't have a heart, and if you're not a conservative when you're older, you don't have a brain. And those political developments are sort of naturally attuned to the life stage, and if we are treating those as criteria for cutoff, it's almost inevitable that everyone would then have criteria to cut their parents off during that stage in life. And as somebody, I want my worldview to be inherited by my children. It's, I think, 60% heritable when it comes to like religiosity and political worldview. That's a really poor, heritability rate, really, when you think about it. 40% of your children. I have 4 kids. I don't want 2 of them to cut me off for dubious criteria. So perhaps your research, and I showed my wife your most recent reel that I could find her, the pinned one. She's a teacher, she's an early childhood educator. There are some who have a truth-based worldview about this, or maybe a realistic. So I do feel the tide is turning, because the mental health industry was the new priesthood. It was the people that we look to sort of develop worldview needs after religiosity declined. And now I believe there is a fair amount of pushback, and perhaps even an incline of people attending more traditional worldviews in their youth, at least among men. Wanted to give you one last question, but before that, where can people look up your work? Obviously the book. Give us a couple seconds on where they can find you.
Yeah, so cutoffbook.com is where they can sign up for the book. I have a newsletter as well, a free newsletter. My website's richardlblake.com. Don't forget the L, there's one L of a difference, as I like to say. And then, yeah, I'm on TikTok and Instagram. Instagram is my main platform, and I'm at The Breath Geek there.
What is the one that you feel like caused the most public discourse, or even the worst, possibly most hated take that you've had?
Well, I've had a lot. Yeah, I guess it's generally the ones about family estrangement that people are cutting off their parents when they shouldn't be, and I guess there's one I did about digitally mediated estrangement, and that got stitched by quite a few people. Yeah. So basically, the researcher, I think Al Kawazan, now I can never say it, but they basically showed that people were doing like word of mouth mimicry from online things. It's like they were reading about estrangement forums, getting the idea that estrangement was maybe a good idea for their situation, and then repeating word for word the things they learned in the forums out in real life. I'll give another one as well, actually. The Lost in the Mall study, the Elizabeth Loftus study. Do you know that one?
I've heard of Loftus, but I don't know that.
Yeah, so false memory research. So Elizabeth Loftus in 1995 brought participants in and told them like 3 truths and a lie. And the lie was that they were lost in a mall when they were a child, and they were recovered by a stranger, and they were able to insert that in, I think, about 30% of participants. And then I got a lot of pushback because people were like, oh, well, they did a follow-up where they found that you can't do it to physically abusive things because, or memories, because they did the same study but told people they had an enema when they were a child, and they found they couldn't implant that memory. But then what this person who stitched me didn't realise is they did another study with mousetrap memory, where they said, oh, you got your finger caught in a mousetrap, and that hurt a lot, and there was a big ordeal. They were able to implant the physical pain of the mousetrap memory in certain people, and what they kind of concluded was like that you can't implant implausible memories like an enema. So when someone's never had an enema, they can't really imagine it, whereas you can imagine your finger getting caught in a mousetrap. And then they did replicate the Elizabeth Loftus study in 2023, and it had like an even greater success rate in implanting those false memories. So yeah, basically people think I'm trying to get sexual abusers off. I'm trying to get sexual abusers off, but as I like to say, like, victims of false accusation are victims as well. False accusation. How many false accusation movies do we have? Shawshank Redemption, The Green Mile, The Hurricane. All these things is one of the most like emotionally compelling thing when someone gets convicted of a crime they didn't do. That we should protect those people too.
Yeah. And these implications are really devastating. I hope that we can get to a world where there's a restoration of balance in how we're treating these systems. And the Lindsay Clancy case is really indicative of giving perhaps too much of our trust over to a system that has not earned it, in my opinion. Like you said about Freud, it very rarely went right at all throughout the course of how we've been treating mental health crises, and of course the numbers keep going up. So your work is extremely important in that, and I really hope that God graces you with the platform that you deserve. I should say, I really appreciate you taking the slings and arrows, and if I do go on for doctoral work, you will have set the table so that others of us can come and eat, and that will not be something that we then have to incur the wrath of the public yet again for the way that you've already done that for us. So thank you so much. Dr. Richard L. Blake, thank you so much for your time. Thanks again for doing this hard work.
Thank you for having me.